Welcome to Off the Record with me, Sanny Ntayombya. Every Friday, I bring a brand new perspective to the week's old headlines. So sit back, relax, and let's get that conversation going. But before we do, make sure you hit that follow button. And now, let's get into the very first headline. To live in today's Rwanda is to exist in a country where all dreams are possible and nothing is beyond those who dare to dream. I tweeted those sentiments on Saturday afternoon as I sat in my seat looking around the refurbished Stade Amahoro, feeling like I really wasn't in the country. It felt like I could have been anywhere in the world. It was such a weird moment for me, but a very proud one. But unfortunately, while we were inside the stadium facilities, enjoying the lounges and really having a great time, I learned much later that a few issues occurred right outside the stadium gates. Videos spreading across social media like wildfire showed young women and men, so yay for gender equality, I guess, crowding the fences, pushing their way forward, and finally destroying at least one stadium gate. Extremely unfortunate. As a result, the obvious conversation that ensued was largely about crowd control and security failings. First, I think that that's a conversation that needs to be had. And knowing our security forces, it is one that was definitely had at police, with the Republican Guard, and knowing them, Saturday's incidents will never happen again, not on their watch. I personally, though, want to talk about a much larger topic, and that's how we as Rwandans all relate to public property. You see, building public property is hard, but in my view, maintaining public property is even harder. Let me explain. So the Treasury had to find over $160 million to renovate Amahoro Stadium. And the teams at the Ministries of Infrastructure and Sports, not forgetting Rwanda Housing Authority, had to figure out how to build it on time and on budget. The fact that they were able to do so within 2 years is to be highly commended. So, yay for them. Unfortunately, what we as Africans have been largely unable to do is to maintain these projects and build upon them. Many of them have been allowed to decay and fall apart. And it's so easy to blame government for this decay, but we need to remind ourselves that the government is actually us. And that's the thing that, and the things that the government is building are actually ours. So watching the thousands of young people in their excitement, destroying parts of the stadium, I got a sense of the fact that they didn't really feel that sense of ownership. But instead of pointing fingers at our young people and calling them vandals, I believe that what we need to do is to improve our civic education, especially at the primary level. This is how I see this. So if we are going to teach people to value public property, then we will need to teach them that this, at a very young level, like allow them to know that as a Rwandan, this is yours. These roads are yours. These schools are yours. Teach them to value them. Like when you think about, if you go to London, if you go to places in Europe, you'll see buildings that are 300, 400, 500 years old, and they are treasured. I don't feel sometimes that we treasure these things as much as we should. Of course, the worst part is then we'll pay a ton of money to fly to Europe. We'll pay a ton of money to go to Paris and enjoy the Eiffel Tower and enjoy the Champs-Élysées. But we could have done that ourselves. We could have had our own things, but it seems like every couple of years we're building on something. We're starting afresh. And that's a huge problem. But then how do we teach people to value stuff? And I think that that's where civic education really comes in handy. We cannot just teach biology, math, physics, because then we're teaching people how to be doctors, but we're not teaching them how to be good doctors. And we're teaching them how to be mathematicians, but how do you do math in a country that's falling apart? You can only do that if the civics are right. And maybe this is a challenge, I guess, for the Ministry of Education. How are you teaching young people to value what is theirs? Until then, and if we don't, then I will not be surprised if in a generation, everything that we've built at a high cost of manpower and funds will be destroyed, because we've seen it in other countries, right? But hopefully Rwanda will do better. And I think civics is at the heart of maintaining all the things that we've built over the last 30 years. And about talking about the last 30 years and moving forward, tomorrow all roads will lead to Musanze, as probably tens of thousands of people drive to the northern province to attend the very first RPF presidential campaign stop. And all I can say is this: traffic police and their Sophias are about to have a Christmas come early. Knowing people's excitement, they will probably be driving quite quickly. So I guess the police will be happy. The outcome of the 15th July election is as clear as day. I mean, President Kagame will win by a landslide. To end all landslides, there isn't really a presidential contest, at least not between President Kagame and the other candidates. Think I'm lying? Here's this. Let me just ask a question. Who is he standing against? What are their names? It's okay, I'll wait. Failed? Well, well, I can understand. Well, the first opponent is a chairperson of the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda. His name is Frank Habineza. And the other, less well known, is Philippe Mpayimana, a man without a party, i.e. an independent. So who are the two candidates? Frank Habineza is slightly better known, probably because he isn't as media shy as Philippe. And he's been president and spokesperson of the Democratic Green Party of Rwanda since 2009, and he's been a member of parliament since 2018. Habineza is attempting to be head of state again after his first bid failed last time in 2017, where he got only 0.45% of the total votes. Philippe Mpayimana is currently, funny enough, a senior expert in charge of community engagement in the Ministry of National Unity and Civic Education, Mini Bumwe, a position he has held since November 2021. So, funny enough, he's actually a civil servant today. And like Frank, this is his second go-around trying to contest against President Kagame. Funny enough, in 2017, he got 0.72% of the total votes in the election that the incumbent, again, President Kagame, won by a landslide. So what I find interesting is that the last time the two met, and this time I'm meaning not President Kagame, but rather Mpayimana and Habineza, Mpayimana actually beat Habineza by 0.27%. So I think that the real competition is between the two candidates. Who will be number two? Will it be a repeat performance by Mpayimana, or shall Frank Habineza, using the organizational ability of his party, win this time? And if he doesn't win, shall the Green Party keep allowing him to stand and waste their resources when he can't even beat a person who's campaigning on a shoestring and doesn't even have a party? We shall have to watch their campaigns. And that is something that I find really, really interesting. Do I think that Frank Habineza will win? Obviously not. Will he beat Philippe? I would hope so, because if he doesn't, again, like where does it leave him? I think it leaves him in a really, really, really bad place. And I then have to ask myself, what has he been doing over the last, 7 years as MP? Has he not been able to build his public profile? Because Philippe certainly hasn't. He hasn't been going on the media. He hasn't. I actually had Frank Habineza on my podcast, the long form, and we had a long conversation. And so he's had a lot more chance to explain his policies. But if he doesn't win, I think it's a wrap for him politically. I don't. I think if he doesn't win, he should not stand again. And it might be time for him to look for the Green Party of Rwanda to look for another candidate to stand for the next presidential elections. I don't see how he gets out of that mess. And talking about messes, there's an article that I read in the Associated Press there was an interesting quote. The quote was, Burundi seems to be running short of everything but patience. And this was an article that came out on the 18th of June, so that's just this week. And quoting from the article, it says something like, it's never been easy in landlocked Burundi, which at times has been described as the world's poorest country according to United Nations figures. The list, and I'm still quoting the article, the list of commodities is in short supply in recent months has ranged from fuel to sugar. But an electricity shortage is hitting the hardest, slowing attempts at economic recovery. And then further on in the article, it says that on the 11th of January, Burundi closed its border with Rwanda, accusing its neighbor of backing rebels, which Rwanda denied. The Burundian authorities have said that the border closure is not responsible for the widespread commodities shortage, as they say that most trade comes in via Congo. But in the article, they do accept that Rwanda is an important trading partner, and trade between the two countries have been affected. But let's be serious, people. Let's be serious. Tourism is so loved as a source of income because it's what I call a low-hanging fruit. All you have to do is to be a pretty country and accessible, and people will come. Throw in a few beaches, cold beers, and presto, easy foreign exchange. Foreign exchange that you can then use to buy imported goods such as, guess what? Fuel, or igitoro as Burundians call it. I think that the government of Burundi has scored a massive own goal, thinking that they could replace tourism and trade dollars from Rwanda for coltan and gold from the DRC. The thing is, M23 is giving the Burundian soldiers a battering, and so what next? I think that if this continues, there might be a coup d'etat. Simply because, if there's not a coup d'etat, how do we move forward? So what next? A coup d'etat? Probably not. The Afandes and the political bigwigs are still eating. So I expect things to get worse and worse and worse. Hopefully sense will prevail, but can it without President Ndayishimiye getting deposed by his own people? We'll have to keep on observing. Now, it's hard to talk about Burundi because it's such a sad situation. And I've been seeing a lot of people kind of, especially on social media, talk about them with not a lot of compassion. I feel a lot of compassion for the Burundian people. No one wants to see that. No one wants to see a situation where a beautiful country, beautiful people are just going through so much. But fundamentally, as HE has said, politics a country and peoples live and die by the politics that they choose. Now, like I said earlier, the government of Burundi thought that they would be able to get their foreign exchange from Congo. They thought that they would be able to get the get coltan, get gold, and that is not me saying this. This is actually from a UN report. Thing is, now they're busy fighting with M23. They're not being given access to the mines that they thought they would be, and now they're in between a rock and a hard place. Do we keep fighting M23? I guess they have no choice. Do they open the borders and then kind of have the embarrassment of having to kowtow? I don't think that the Sendede people can actually even allow that to happen. So unfortunately, like I said, people will just get squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And I don't see a resolution. And the worst part is I'm not seeing the African Union, I'm not seeing the continent get involved. It seems like we're letting Burundi die by the wayside and just, shrugging our shoulders and just living our lives. But there are millions, over 10 million people whose lives are being affected by the bad decisions that they're making. And it's just very sad. And I wish the UN would do more. I wish the African Union would do more. I'm not even going to talk about the East African community because we failed to even deal with what's happening in Eastern Congo. It's a tough situation. And looking at tough situations, on Wednesday in Nairobi, more than 200 protesters were arrested, and especially most of them young people, and all of them protesting against proposed tax hikes in a finance bill that was due to be tabled in Parliament. I mean, the issue of taxes is such a big deal that some Kenyans are mockingly referring to President William Ruto as Zakayo. Now, Zakayo is Swahili for the biblical figure who was called Zacharias, who was portrayed in the Bible as a greedy tax collector who then climbed on a tree to see Jesus. So there's a lot of Zakayo. If you were to look for the word Zakayo on Twitter, you'd end up seeing President Ruto. And because since being president, President Ruto has tried to introduce a bunch of new taxes and raise a few old ones, because for him, higher taxation is necessary to reduce government borrowing and bring down the Kenyan national debt, which today stands at about $65 billion. And let's also give him a little bit of leeway, because most of that debt was inherited from previous governments. So we're talking about the Kibaki, we're talking about the Uhuru government. So far, the pressure has worked and has forced Ruto to scrap some of the proposed taxes, such as the one that mandated a 16% tax on bread. But here's the thing. However, even if the young people who are fighting so hard force the government not to raise any taxes, someone will have to pay the debt that is owed to foreign creditors, right? The risk is, if you don't pay that debt, then Kenya will go into default. The Kenyan currency will tumble, and people's life savings will become worthless. I mean, debt isn't a terrible thing. Right now in Rwanda's debt is about $8 billion, which is, when you think about the fact that our GDP is about 13 point something billion dollars as of last year, when you kind of figure out those two things, that is a tidy sum. The thing is, if debt is used wisely to create even more value, then it can be easily paid, especially when that debt is not at a very high interest rate. Thankfully, what Rwanda has done is try to get a lot of concessional loans where the debt is to be paid over a period of, say, 20 years, and the interest rates sometimes are as low as 1%. So it's not that problematic. The issue then becomes when you're getting debt and then using that debt to bribe people for votes, or that debt is then stolen through corruption. Then that becomes problematic. I think that the Kenyan issue is that the debt which they took was either wasted or unfortunately stolen. And here's the thing, the debtors don't care, the creditors don't care what you did with the money. Like, they gave you the money, the Chinese gave you the money, they want their money back at the time when you promised to pay them back. And that's all they want. So here's a novel idea. Can Ruto cut down on government spending instead of increasing taxes, right? Because that's the only way the math is. But I don't see him doing that either, because let's be honest here. He's a politician, and he's not trying to become a one-term president. So the way I imagine it is that he will seesaw between those two positions, begging his creditors to give him more time, and not cutting down on government expenditure. So do I see the creditors giving him more time? Perhaps. Especially if he plays ball when it comes to certain geopolitical issues. And guess what? Guess who today is becoming the African face of the anti-Russia Western coalition? Guess what? It's Mr. Ruto. He's at front and center of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So I bet that the IMF, the World Bank, who all, let's be honest, are controlled by the Western world. So we're talking about the US, we're talking about France. Because he's playing ball, they will probably also play ball with him and eventually give him a financial shot in the arm and allow him to live to fight another day. Because the idea of them, of the Kenyan government saying that, you know what, we are going to have to lay off workers, we are going to stop giving, we'll reduce our services because of the lack of, we're trying to reduce expenditure. I don't see that happening. There is no way in hell that will happen. So that is the game. That's what I think the game is right now. The game is, he is going to play ball. The debtors will, play ball with him and kind of go slow with demanding their money. And once he plays the game, then the debtors will play the creditors will play their game, and the Kenyan public will be kind of left in that weird place where they will feel that, we've pressured the government to listen to us, but really, I don't think that the Kenyan people are in as much control as they think they are. I think that right now, the people who are actually in the driving seat is the IMF, the World Bank, and the Western powers. That's just my thought. And that, my friends, is a wrap for the very first episode. Thank you so much for making it to the very, very end. Remember to follow us on our social media and to make sure to check out my other podcast, The Long Form with Sanny Ntayombya. It comes out every Monday like clockwork. Hope to have you back next Friday. Have a great week.